Welcome into the WarChant.com post-game podcast. Ryan Kelly and Ira Chaffel here with you here on the top floor of, or well, I think we're on the next to the top, whatever. We're high up at Blue Devils Tower overlooking Wallace Wade Stadium. Florida State, of course, victorious earlier today, 17-10 over the Duke Blue Devils. And Ira, we'll cut right into this thing because here's the thing. I mean, here we are, week 7 of the college football season. There's only so many ways that you can say this team is talented, it has good players, and it's just a very situationally bad football team.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to rack up 425 yards of offense, not really turn the ball over much, and come away with 17 points. And they did that. It was 7-3 at halftime, even though FSU had kind of dominated the first half, and then had chances. They got down in the red zone, and the young quarterback throws an interception. They just went backwards, had a couple of holding calls at the worst times. That's kind of really what it is. It's not like they commit 100 penalties. It's just that the ones they do always seem to become the worst times. And this is not an offense with a freshman quarterback that can overcome 2nd and 20, 3rd and 15. Those kinds of plays really hurt this offense. You go back to James, when Jameis was here in 2013, it didn't matter. You could be 2nd and 18, 3rd and 25. It didn't matter. They could make up those plays. But you have an injury-riddled receiver core. You have a true freshman quarterback. They have to stay ahead of the chains. And when they don't do that, drive stall, even though they go between the 20s really well, as they did again today against a Duke defense that's been pretty good for most of the season.
Yeah, and it's not just the offense, it's the defense as well. I mean, you look at this, the defense played a decently solid game. I mean, 111 yards on the ground for Duke, 204 through the air, 315. I mean, it's not great numbers for a defense, but it's also not terrible numbers. It's just an okay day, but at the same time, they gave up plays at the worst possible times. A 57-yard bomb on 3rd and 17. Honestly, Duke gets a little cute in the end zone, or else you'd have had a tie ball game off a trick play when I believe it's Emmett Rice that comes down with the interception.
Yeah, he did. He did. The receiver's wide open. Running back just took too long to throw it, then lofted up too high, then it was deflected, and then Emmett Rice comes up with an acrobatic interception. No, you're right. The 3rd and 17 play was just emblematic of this season for this defense, and that the fact that you had Duke on the ropes and you let him complete a 57-yard pass was kind of a broken play. The quarterback got outside of contain, and then the defensive backs and linebackers miscommunicated, and the receiver ended up being open. He could have walked into the end zone if the throw wasn't a little bit overthrown. The receiver had to make an acrobatic catch. But yeah, it's just hard to – it's kind of hard to kind of break down this team and really isolate what the issues are, because it's something different kind of every week, and it's more than anything. It's not like they're just abysmal, and they weren't abysmal last week against Miami. I mean, they ran the ball well last week against Miami. They'll play well in stretches, but then kind of fall apart in stretches as well.
Tavares McFadden is a guy that I think there were sky-high expectations, and you knew he wasn't going to have the season he had last year. I mean, where it seemed like any time a ball was thrown his way, it would find its way into his hands. But for the second straight week, even though he didn't play bad last week, of course, he's going to be known as the guy who ends up with that game-winning touchdown. And then this week, there were a couple key moments where it just seems like Duke was able to get the better of him.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly wasn't his best day, and I'm sure there was a big pass that he was. I'm not even sure how they caught it. It seemed like he was right there in position and didn't finish the play. And I think that's really the story with him on a lot of those plays. You go back to the North Carolina game last year, where he gets called for the pass interference. The touchdown last week against Miami, then that long conversion today, where a lot of times he's in position to make the play, just doesn't finish the play. And also, I thought that overall, the defense, it's kind of a give and take. I mean, on one hand, you look at the overall numbers and say, okay, those aren't bad, and especially when you take away the 57 yards, you don't take them away, but if you account for basically a busted play, accounted for, a sixth of their total offense. But at the same time, and you also say it's positive because you had a lot of guys injured. I mean, this is a game where they didn't have Jacob Pugh, so Adonis Thomas had to play. A first-year player he
played very, very well. He ends up with 5 tackles on the day and a half tackle for loss.
Yeah, so he had to contribute a lot. You also didn't have, there was a couple other guys. Trey Marshall you didn't have, so you played Adrian Westbrook a lot. They were banged up defensively, and so that led to some moving guys around. I thought overall, again, it wasn't a bad day, but at the same time, I think if you're an FSU fan who's been looking for a get-right game, they're looking for this team to show that in the second half of the season they could be closer to the team they thought in preseason. This wasn't it. I mean, Florida State has, I think, the closest FSU Duke game before today was, I think, like 19 points or something like that. Duke's the only team FSU hasn't ever lost to in the ACC, and really they've never come close to beating them until, the 7-point game today that was a tie game in the fourth quarter.
And I also do think that's an operation of this is a Duke program that's far better than what Florida State's played a lot of those times they butted heads. You're, of course, talking about closest margin of victory, I believe, was the 2007 homecoming game.
25-6
at Doak Campbell Stadium, yeah. But and this Duke program is far different than what it used to be, but it's also the idea that even with that, you should win this game comfortably, especially with the numbers you put up, with the statistics you put up. And again, that just goes back to the idea that situationally, this is just a bad football team because numbers-wise, this isn't a bad day at all. Josh Sweat has a great bounce-back day. He has a sack. He has 2 tackles for loss. Matthew Thomas gives you a good day with a tackle for loss. I mean, offensively, you can't say much more about that running game. Cam Akers with 115. He finally breaks one to the house for a touchdown, a 42-yarder. Jacquez Patrick, who really, to me, if you're giving out a game ball in this game, is a guy who at key moments kept drives alive, kept rolling, and looked like he wanted it more than anybody else. Again, it's not that the pieces on this team are bad. It's just that situationally, sometimes the calls aren't there. There were a couple of Jimbo Fisher's play calls in this game where you just kind of scratch your head and you went, what? There were a couple times where you saw where the defense was in position and you saw, there's a delay of game coming out of timeout when Florida State's in the red zone at one point. That ends up turning into a James Blackman interception coming back from that time, or from that delay of game. There were just so many times where this team just doesn't seem like it has it together, despite when you look at the box score and you say to yourself, wow, that number's not bad. Wow, that number's not bad. A true freshman in Jimbo Fisher's offense went 18 of 21 today. 2 of the 3 that he missed are picks.
And really, you think about that. He 18 for 21. He passed for about 200 yards. He did have the 2 interceptions, but he's 18 for 21. You had 2 running backs that combined for over 200 yards rushing. And you scored 17 points. I mean, it doesn't seem to add up. And again, even in the passing game where you had Naquan Murray catches a 40, 45-yard catch, it's called back because they didn't get lined up right. Apparently, the tight end, the coaching staff ended up yelling at Naquan Murray on the sideline. But from the sounds of it, talking to Jimbo after the game, Naquan Murray may have been lined up right. Maybe the tight end was not lined up right. But that made Izzo an ineligible receiver, so that play comes back. It's just that's the kind of thing. And the way Jimbo sees it, and if people watch the postgame video, if you go to warchant.com and watch Jimbo's postgame video, he comes across very optimistic and very excited about the potential of this offense. He still believes that this team can be really good if they can clean up these mistakes. The problem is, again, you're in mid-October now, and you have a huge game against Louisville come up. Obviously, Syracuse is not a pushover. They just beat Clemson. Boston College is not a pushover. They just beat Louisville. And then you got obviously you got to go to Clemson. So there's a lot of huge games for this team. The positive side, and I think some of the players mentioned it, is with that Clemson loss, with just the uncertainty in the ACC, they're not 100% sure that they're out of this thing, that if they can start playing to their potential, that maybe they could do some damage. But as you've said several times, they have to clean up these mistakes.
Yeah, and overall, a guy you mentioned that did have a nice bounce-back day today. How about Naquan Murray? 5 catches, 81 yards, a 38-yarder as a long today. Doesn't end up in the end zone, but really got blasted all week and has been blasted for the last couple weeks, and that he just has not shown up in this offense. And with Auden Tate hurt and Keith Gavin out and so many questions there, and of course we didn't see nearly as much of DJ Matthews as we thought we would, he steps forward and he has himself a nice game.
Yeah, it was big. This receiving core is if you think about what you thought it was going to be in preseason, even going back to the summer when it was already going to expect to be kind of a thin receiving core after Travis Rudolph left early and they didn't sign as many guys as they hoped last year. You get Devontae Phillips not kicked off the team, but gets in trouble. He's suspended. And then you have now, Auden Tate is playing with one shoulder. Keith Gavin didn't play today because of his leg injury. George Campbell tried to give it a go in pregame warmups. He couldn't play. So you've got Jared Jackson, a walk-on, playing in the first series. He's playing. He probably played.
He had 40, a catch today.
He probably had 40 snaps. They're And they want to work in this freshman, but I got the feeling this week that they weren't real sold that Tamorian Terry was ready to play. He does not get on the field really at all. And like you said, DJ Matthews played some, got a catch, but wasn't out there consistently.
Overall, finally, you mentioned it. Another one this coming week. Nooner against Louisville. Louisville just lost to Boston College, which is funny and interesting to see how that program's kind of in a free fall. But a program like that, before going up against a Florida State team who still seems like it's trying to figure it out and get out of its own way, I don't know if that's the best thing in the world for FSU.
Man, that game there's no way to tell what's going to happen with that game. I mean, really, Louisville is a shadow of what they were expected to be. They're obviously struggling mightily on defense and not making enough plays consistently on offense. And on the one hand, I don't know that FSU's defense has figured anything out against Louisville. I mean, I think what we saw last year has to keep FSU fans up at night this week leading up to this game, that Lamar Jackson could have another big game like that. But at the same time, Louisville has been a train wreck as well. So, I don't think there's any way to know what's going to happen in this game. It wouldn't surprise me at all if both teams went up and down the field, because Louisville's defense is not very good. And I don't think FSU's offense is in the position where they're just going to slow down that offense.
But the good news for Florida State is that defense is not great. And it should be, if you can once again get out of your own stinking way, have some opportunities to put up some points on the board and get a chance to be at 500 for the first time all this season. But until then, Florida State does get the W today, 17-10 at Wallace Wade Stadium over the Duke Blue Devils. Of course, we'll have complete coverage for you over the weekend at warchant.com. We'll be back to talk a little bit more about this on Monday on Wake Up War Chant. Until then, have a good one, everybody.